Shelly's there. Yeah, that was it. 1, 2, 3,
Oh,
4,
there's
5,
someone
6.
else.
Yeah, there was a 7th person.
Well, I'm sorry, 7th person. Oh, it was Kelly. She was on the phone. Okay, Kelly, we'll wait for you.
I'll message her.
Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna continue on.
Where did you go?
Luckily, what was that?
You went away.
I did go away because the entire meeting ended suddenly.
Oh no, just like recently, just like seconds ago. Wait, where did you go again?
Hopefully, no, I won't go away again. This time we're good. We're on a different account. God willing. All right. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy. Okay, so the letting go technique, just to recap, aware of the feeling, letting it rise up like a wave, letting it crest over, and just staying with it, letting it run its course. It doesn't take very long to do this. It can be a little scary, so if you're scared of allowing the feeling to crest and rise up, then start there. Start with that fear of allowing the feeling to be. And let that go first.
And so one of the principles that this is based on is the reality that all feeling is limited in quantity. All of these negative feelings, I should say, love is not, for example. That these negative feelings are of limited quantity. And the analogy that I'll use with people is if we imagine these feelings sort of living in a big vat, like a water tower, what we're doing is opening the valve on that tank or tower and just allowing that feeling to pour out with an understanding that it isn't an infinite source. When we tune into that feeling, it isn't, I'm saying, well, I guess I'm just going to be sad for the rest of my life. No, when we really get good at this, we'll in fact be sad for, like Jamie said, 2 or 3 minutes usually, and then experience a great deal of relief as that tank that's labeled grief runs dry. Now we may have to turn around, 2 hours later and do it again, until we have finished working through whatever is going on in our lives and whatever healing is needed so that the tank stops filling itself back up. But the answer is never to clamp the valve down even tighter so that we don't feel the feeling. That's just a recipe for disaster. So the more often that we can open the valve and just allow those feelings to flow through us, again, as Jamie has said, without judgment or intellectualization, the more healthy we will be.
Mm-hmm. The second tool is more of an energetic tool, I think. It's using light, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, probably all of you. So when we become aware of the feeling, we can welcome the feeling, and sometimes it's helpful to almost imagine yourself embracing it as you would a child or a loved one. And you can embrace it and breathe golden rose-colored light into it. And so golden rose-colored light is a very soft but high vibration color that really helps to soothe and comfort us when we're doing this. Another way is called a body scan. Body scan is something that a lot of Buddhists will do when they're meditating and they feel a feeling arising. So you can, if you know you have a feeling of some kind, you can do like a mental scan of your body and see if you can determine or figure out or see in some way where you're holding the feeling. And when you notice where the feeling's being held, you can send loving kindness to that part of your body, if that works for you. You can ask for grace to move into that part of you, that part of your body, and help to heal you. You can also breathe golden rose-colored light into that place. Another way that you can work with your feelings is you can dance or paint or sing or scream or cry or whatever you need to do. You can
Or write.
Write poetry or whatever. I have found it very useful when I have a feeling that I know I don't want to intellectualize it, and I don't want to like get my monkey mind like running on what is this about and why do I feel this way and I shouldn't feel this way. I will just put on some music, whatever music seems appropriate, and go someplace quiet and just move my body however my body wants to move. And sometimes that looks like a dance, and sometimes that looks like rolling around on the ground. Either way doesn't matter. It's all healthy and appropriate, and really, really gets the emotions and the feelings to come up and be healed. Journaling is also a really, really healthy way that you can work with your feelings. When you journal, it's important not to proofread your journal or criticize what you're writing. If you have nasty things to write and you want to express like anger or things that you aren't proud of, what better place to do it than in your own journal with nobody else is going to read it. And it's an excellent way to get things moving. It's a very excellent way. It's only really helpful if we're not criticizing ourselves as we write, though. If we're like making it like a, like it's a 9th grade essay or something, forget it. That's not going to be super useful. Okay. Hi, Kelly. I'm glad you're back. Sorry. So Noah has his own kind of way of being with feelings that I think would be useful to talk about.
Yeah, and it's not a different way. Well, it is, I guess, a different way to be with feelings. It isn't like you have to choose this or other ways. There's another kind of spiritual practice that can help us cease to identify so strongly with our feelings. Because again, that is something that really just begins to compound the problem. That's the difference between saying, I feel angry, which is a statement of feeling and a statement of truth, versus I am angry, which is possessive. It's taking ownership of that feeling, and it's really stating that I am identical to my feelings, and that's not the truth about feelings. Feelings are information that are going to come through us, and it's information about what's being held in our subconscious that needs to be healed. It's information about maybe some boundaries have been violated in my life. It's information about something I need to change or reorient in my life, some aspect of my thinking that is off. It's information, though. I would no sooner say I am angry and identify with that than I would identify with tendinitis, right? I would say my knee hurts, not I am my painful knee, right? There's a very powerful difference between those two examples and how we choose to language our being with feelings. And so one of the things that we can do is become an observer of our feelings. And so that takes us one step removed from those feelings, not to dissociate from them, not to suppress them or repress them or hide from them or pretend they're not there, but we get more information sometimes if we can step away and look back on something. We gain perspective. And so the difference is, I can think of a specific example for myself. I have certainly had the experience of identifying with my anger. I am angry, and I was living in it, and it was a part of me, and it was my identity. And in that moment, me and anger were intertwined. I've had that experience, and maybe many of you have. I have had another experience of allowing myself to express anger while maintaining a place in consciousness as an observer and sort of watching myself, so to speak, be angry and going, isn't that interesting? Look at how angry I am. And so somebody else watching me might just see me, kind of smashing something to bits, right? or pounding my fist and go, boy, that guy's really angry. And even though that visibly was going on, my internal process at the time was, isn't this interesting? Look at how angry I am. I wonder what I'm so angry about. I should probably look into this, right? And so there was an aspect of consciousness where I'm not fully enmeshed with that feeling. I'm sort of over here watching myself feel that feeling. And so that can be a really useful tool as well, especially for some of these really lower vibrating feelings like shame or guilt. I think it's really important for people potentially who spend a lot of time in those levels to have an experience of not being their feeling, right? You are feeling shame. Shame is coming up and it's showing itself to you and it's communicating something to you. But if you, in those moments of really heightened shame, can sort of stand aside and say, gosh, that's so interesting. Look at all of this shame that's coming up for me. I wonder what this is about. Where is this coming from? I'm really curious about this. As that independent observer, it will help you energetically extract yourself from being one with that feeling, and help, I think, provide a sense of freedom that, well, maybe I don't have to feel shame all the time. Maybe I don't have to stay here in this feeling because it's not who I am. It's just something I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I think one thing that's really important to remember is that you can use any of these techniques, whatever one resonates or works for you. It's not important, for instance, or essential, I'll put it that way. It's not essential for me to necessarily come at my feelings from the place that Noah is in, because that works for him. I think for most of my life, I was attempting to work with my feelings in this way. Oh, what am I feeling? And like very, let's put it this way. I was trying so hard to step back from my feelings that I wasn't allowing myself to actually experience them. And he had been doing great at experiencing his feelings. So this is a step up for him to kind of have the dual experience of feeling the feelings and also observing the feelings. But for me, I have a much better time if I kind of give myself over to the feeling for a short period of time and allow it to express through my body. That's just what works best for me. So I encourage you all to attempt every single one of these different tricks and see which one works best for you.
Right. And really what we're talking about are essentially masculine and feminine ways of engaging with feelings. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean manly ways and womanly ways. that's not what those,
about gender.
It's not gender. That's not what those words mean. Divine masculine and divine feminine, energetically masculine and energetically feminine. The energetic masculine is more of the observer. That's a very energetically masculine place to come from. So the classic imagery would be imagining a king, right? A king kind of sits on his throne and observes his empire, right? That doesn't mean he's not engaged with it, but it means he's an observer. The more energetically or divine feminine approach is to sort of be in the experience. And in all things, we're really looking for balance, right? So for someone who hadn't really felt her feelings, spending more time being the king sitting on the throne and just observing this was not particularly productive. She needed to kind of go out into her kingdom and get in the trenches with the peasants.
Had to get muddy.
Whereas somebody else, maybe they've been doing that their whole lives, and now they actually think they're just the peasant now. And they need a reminder that they're actually the king or queen, and that if they spend some time extracting themselves from that feeling and observing, that will create some space for them to then go, oh, wait a minute, I'm not my shame. This is just some feeling I'm feeling. There's room for me to feel something else here as well, have a different experience.
And so when you try each of these techniques, most of the time when you're upset, there are layers of feelings that you'll move through. Sometimes we start with fear and we have to work with the fear a little bit. And then once the fear is resolved, or we have spent the energy, so to speak, then we may feel guilt. Oh, now I'm guilty. Why do I feel guilty now? Okay, let me just work with the guilt. And maybe after the guilt is gone, we can find the shame underneath that, or the despair, or the grief. And so sometimes you'll have to move through layers while you're doing this work, while you're doing this healing work for yourself. Don't give up. Well, of course, if you don't have the time to do, 30 feelings, then you'll have to say, okay, not now, but later. So for me, if I'm experiencing a strong emotion, but I have to take care of my kids, or I need to drive safely, and I don't have the time and energy to cry or allow myself to do any of these techniques, I tell myself, not now, but later. And then I make sure that later comes. So it's kind of a temporary pause on the feelings, but the feelings are not going to get suppressed or repressed because you are agreeing with yourself that you'll come back to them. And the last, well, there's many techniques, but one more technique is you can use some kind of energetic consciousness, a higher consciousness of some kind to help you resolve whatever the feelings are. So when I work with people, I will commonly ask the angels of love, or the divine feminine, or the divine mother, or whatever the deity or energy that they most resonate with. I will ask that energy to help resolve the feelings, to help wash through and dissolve everything that needs to be dissolved, and transmute all of this energy into love. And at the end of this class, we're going to have some time to do some of that work. So you'll get to experience it. So I'm going to talk about some different emotions now. We're going to start at the very bottom of the scale of consciousness with shame. So shame is an internal state of inadequacy, feeling unworthy, thinking you've done something wrong, regret. And so when we feel shame, we can feel that our whole being is somehow flawed or bad or excluded from everyone else. So shame motivates us to hide, to keep things secret, to do something to save face. It causes us to talk around things instead of going straight to the point. Shame is different, however, than guilt, which is actually above shame. Shame is an internalization that is so deep that we feel that our being is bad. And guilt is a feeling that arises when we feel that our behavior, or we think that our behavior is bad. We've done something bad. As a society, I think, and probably across the entire world, we are much more likely to admit that we're guilty than that we feel shame. Shame is not something people like to talk about or express. So we usually keep our shame stuffed down somewhere in our body deeply. And it causes us to avoid things that could be lovely, like having your picture taken with your family, or going to a beach and swimming without a shirt on, or without, a giant bathing suit or whatever. And so one of the ways that we deal with shame is by projecting it onto other people. And so women will often do this when they have shame about their sexuality. They will shame other women who apparently or perceivably do not have as much shame about their sexuality or their bodies. And so we call that slut shaming. And men do this as well. Men will do it more often related to athletic endeavors, or like make fun of each other for their bodies in different ways. So people will often attack others to keep their shame down. So it's kind of a strategy so that you feel more confident about yourself. you're trying to relocate your shame onto someone else, which doesn't work. Just suppresses. And when kids are little, when kids are really small, they don't really have strong energetic barriers of their own. They haven't developed them yet. And so if someone is doing some kind of abusive behavior around them, and when people are abusing others, they're usually very ashamed of it, even though they won't verbalize that. Sometimes a child will absorb that shame and think that this person is abusing me because I'm bad. I've done something wrong. I must be a terrible person to be treated this way.
Can you pull the consciousness sheet?
Sure. No one wants to segue into the...
Can I pull this out? Just so
Oh, yeah. Sure. Okay.
So one of the other things that can be helpful as we begin to engage with our feelings and try to let some of this information come up into our consciousness is looking at this level like shame, for example, and say, well, I don't know. Do I feel shame or do I feel guilty? I can't quite tell. We'll look at some of these other associations, again, specifically the God view and life view. You might, for example, because I think that shame is often one of those ones that's very deeply either suppressed or repressed, right? So people may not really be in touch with this idea that what they're actually experiencing is shame. But they may, for example, be able to admit, so to speak, that they often feel humiliated, right? Because they're not really taking so much ownership of that. They're just saying, oh, so-and-so did something and I felt totally humiliated. Or they'll often feel humiliated about something they're not even involved in. They'll watch some other interaction over there and see what's going on in that dynamic, and they will feel a sense of humiliation come up within them. And so we can look at either these God views, life views, or emotions, and it can provide clues about what those hidden feelings are that want to be looked at and addressed. If I find myself full of regret all of the time, it may be, if I look over at the actual level that's associated with, it may be that I have unresolved grief that I need to look at. If I'm looking out into the world and my life view is one of it's hopeless out there, or nowadays, it really does seem like every other week there's a shooting, right? And if we find ourselves really emotionally getting sucked into the tragedy of that event, and it really shapes the whole world for us. And we go, the whole world is tragic. It's just so tragic out there. Everything out there is tragic. Life is this one series of tragedies after another. Well, that tells me that the feeling that I have happening is one of grief. That level of consciousness is one of grief, and what needs to be looked at and resolved is my own grief. Right.
Thank you. So some of the causes for shame are when we feel self-conscious is one, like we have to go do a speech or we're somehow singled out for attention. We feel in that moment, oh, I'm on display now. Someone's looking at me. People are probably judging me. We can also feel shame when we think there's something wrong with our character. We can feel ashamed or shame when we do something improperly that doesn't meet the qualifications of society. Like if I go to the dog park and I never pick up my dog's poop, I could feel ashamed of that. I don't do that, for the record. I always pick it up. If we make a mistake of some kind, we typically feel ashamed. And then we can feel ashamed when people belittle us or shame us, call us out for something. And we can also feel ashamed if people are critical or judgmental or belittle us in some way. So when I work with people, I typically see people handling shame in one of two ways. They can become very controlling and type A kind of rigid personalities who they're always trying to avoid the shame, and they move into this kind of unhealthy perfectionist type. Also, people kind of on the other end of the pendulum, people will become even more shameful, and they start to self-medicate, they suppress, they may become alcoholic or destructive in some way in their lives, and just the shame just keeps going. It becomes a giant snowball. So when you're working with shame, it's important to become aware of your internal dialogue. What are you saying to yourself? And you want to learn how to develop compassion for yourself when you're saying things that aren't very nice. So in the moment, I could be saying, oh man, Zoom, I should have known better. Why did I, sign up on this link versus that link? And I should have done better. Instead, I can choose a new dialogue. Oh, I made a mistake. Next time I know, I learned from this experience. I'm still a good person. Nobody has died because we had to pause Zoom for a few minutes. Everything's okay. So you want to forgive yourself. You want to move into forgiveness of yourself for anything that you might be ashamed of. So you can do this by releasing and letting go of the judgment in the same process. You can breathe golden rose-colored light into your own judgment of yourself. You can dance your judgment. You can write a poem about it. You can journal about it. So these are a few ways that you can work with shame. Did you want to pipe in?
I did want to pipe in.
Okay,
yeah.
pipe in.
Very quickly. So forgiveness, for example, or acceptance, just moving into a place of, this is how I feel, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I forgive myself for that, and I accept this. Look at where that vibrates. That's 350. And so when we are able to tap into these higher levels of consciousness, these higher vibrating energies, and spend even a few moments just offering ourselves a moment of mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, that vibration level of 350 has the power to transmute and lift up the lower vibration feeling that we're wanting to resolve. I'm done piping.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So moving up on the scale of consciousness, one level to guilt. So I actually kind of like looking at this map of consciousness. So, the level is guilt, and the emotional state is blame. So blame of yourself, typically,
or projected
blame. Yeah. Yes, that too. You see life as evil, and the God view is vindictive. So you perceive God as being vindictive and like punishing and harmful.
And so again, that's just projecting onto the highest level. It's still just a projection, but instead of projecting onto other humans, we project onto God. And so it isn't that God is judging us and finding us guilty. It's that, again, it's our feeling. We're responsible for it. We own it. I don't feel that God is vindictive unless I feel guilty, and I'm worried about being judged.
So guilt happens when we feel responsible or regretful for a perceived offense that we have committed. Sometimes that offense is real, and sometimes it's imaginary. We've created it. So guilt comes from the stories that we tell ourselves, as well as the stories that have been told to us. And so we actually absorb a lot of guilt from other people's narratives of how we should be and we should act. Does anyone have a guilt-tripping mom? Love all the raised hands.
We won't send this recording to them.
So the guilt is kind of this unnecessary cross or burden that we're trying to drag along with us. It's a bag. It's a heavy bag. So some of the causes for guilt could be you could feel guilty for something you actually did. Like maybe you didn't pick up the poop at the dog park. So how you can deal with this guilt is obviously do the techniques, but you can make reparations. You can, next time you go to the dog park, you can pick up the poop and maybe even pick up some other poop that someone else left there. The only thing to be aware of is sometimes we feel guilty for things we actually did that the other person is not aware of. And if they were aware, they wouldn't even care. Like, you know, for me, I always think of like every year I would send all those Christmas cards. And probably not everyone that I would send Christmas cards even cared that I sent them. Maybe some of them did. Some of them would just be like, whatever, I have 100 Christmas cards on my fridge. So that's kind of a guilt that I would take on unnecessarily. Maybe I have done something, but it's based on an imaginary, imaginary thing that I did. It's not really actually harmful to anyone. Another thing that people feel guilty for is guilt. They have guilt for something that they didn't do, but they wanted to do. So they feel guilty for thinking about having sex with someone else outside of their marriage. Or they might feel guilty about wanting to punch someone, but not punching them. I think that's it's very common, actually. It's a very common source of guilt. So like Noah said, you can accept that these thoughts are part of where you are now. You had this thought, you had this feeling, and it's okay. And you can decide that you won't act on that. I'm not actually going to punch this person. So there's also guilt for something that you think you did. Like many people I work with have this magical belief that they thought something bad about a person, and then that bad thing actually happened, and they think that they created it. I jinxed that person. That's not actually, can't happen. Can't happen. We can't wish ill upon someone else and it actually happen unless that person needs to have that experience for some reason and they've created it themselves. So if we're thinking things about a person, we cannot pray for or create something for another person that's not in their highest good. It doesn't work that way. Thank God. We often have guilt that we didn't do enough to help someone. I think that's one of the most common, probably the most common source of guilt for many people that I see. It's like my parents died and I wish I could have done more for them, or I should have been there, or my kid smokes dope now and I should have been a better mother, or whatever. So we call this caregiver guilt. It's very, very important to learn how to say no in relationships. It's a very loving and powerful way to take care of yourself. So we have to kind of work through this guilt and decide, is this actually a guilt that I need to take on? Have I actually done anything wrong? And then decide. So the last source of guilt is survivor guilt. So people who have been through tragedy, like in war or accidents, or like the fires that are happening now in California, the people who make it out and they have their house intact, for instance, or they don't get shot or whatever, they can have an intense amount of guilt for being the one who made it through without receiving the punishment. So sometimes, for instance, there can be people who grow up in really economically repressed areas, and they somehow, through the force of their own will and desire and hard work and effort, they make it to college, and none of their friends or family have ever gone. And so when people have very strong survivor guilt, sometimes they sabotage themselves into failing out of the college because they don't want to escape or elevate themselves really above their loved ones because they may feel they're afraid they'll be excluded or something. So guilt can be, all feelings really are healthy, they're okay, but guilt can be helpful when we have done something and we need to fix it. We need to make a reparation. But most of the guilt that we feel is really due to faulty programming from our family system, from our culture, from our work environment. And so this programming is put in place in order to keep power or to control or to get something to do what we want them to do, right? Like, oh, you haven't seen me in 3 weeks. I really need you to come over and whatever, So we can take responsibility for things that we've done without taking on the blame and the guilt and the shame. And we can do this through the act of forgiveness. Forgiveness of ourselves. So to forgive ourselves means abandoning all the blame and judgment of ourselves or others. And the practice of forgiveness opens up this natural compassion and loving kindness in our own hearts. So in order to work with guilt, feeling guilty about something, I feel guilty because I didn't call my mother. I feel guilty because I didn't send out 50 Christmas cards. The first question that you can ask yourself is it true? Like, do I really have to talk to my mother every day on the phone? Do I really have to? Is it true that I need to send out Christmas cards every year for the next 20 years of my life? And then after I ask myself that and get an answer, maybe it's yes. Maybe I feel I do need to call my mother every day. Then I would ask myself, would everyone else agree this is true? Does everyone else on the planet think, yes, you should call your mother every day? Probably not. That's a good litmus test, right? No. And so we can examine our beliefs about blame, responsibility, how we should feel guilty, we should not feel guilty. As we kind of examine all these beliefs that we have about how we should be behaving or acting, we will quickly realize that these beliefs are extremely exhausting. It's so exhausting, the amount of beliefs that we have about how we are supposed to be as a mom, we're supposed to be as a dad, a provider, etc. Okay? Do you have anything to pipe in with?
Nope.
No, you feel good with the guilt.
Not about guilt.
Okay. Do you want to talk about apathy?
Yeah, so just briefly, so the next one up on the scale there is apathy. And apathy, a bit paradoxically, right, is a feeling. It is a feeling of not caring. So it isn't a total vacuum. It isn't non-feeling. It is the presence of the feeling of not caring, right? So it is still an energy, and it's a higher vibrating energy than shame and guilt. And so again, it's still very, very low ultimately on this scale, but can represent progress. If somebody has been living in shame and guilt, and they have a parent or family experience growing up that has imprinted into their subconscious that they should feel shameful and guilty about being a human and having body functions and hitting puberty and right, that moving into a place of apathy can actually be a net improvement. The key is that we not get attached to any particular level of consciousness on this scale or any particular feeling, that we don't identify with it and say, well, I just don't care, and that's who I am. No, I don't want to. No, I've just decided I don't care and I'm done. Well, then you're stuck in apathy and can't progress up to the next higher level. So anything else to say about there?
No, but I'm going to talk a little bit about
Great.
apathy.
Okay.
So you can see on this chart, grief vibrates. I'm going to talk about grief now. Vibrates at 75, and the emotion is regret. If you look to the right, the emotional state is being in regret. You think life is tragic. So, grief has a lot of different synonyms like sadness, loss, sorrow, loneliness, regret, abandoned, helpless, hopeless. Some people even say nostalgic, bittersweet. These are forms of grief. Mourning, it's a process of mourning. So we can have grief come up as a result of a loss of pretty much anything. Could be a person in our lives, could be the loss of an identity, a job, a belief system, a relationship, a dream. I already said relationship. A dream or a community. For instance, I work with a lot of people who have experienced religious abuse, spiritual abuse in various churches, and the grief process when leaving these systems, these religious organizations is profound. People are they have to move through a lot of grief. So that's a big deal. So there's difference. The difference between grief and apathy is that when we're in apathy, we think that no one can help and everything's useless. I mean, no, I can't help myself. Nobody can help me. When we're feeling grief, we think that someone else can help us, but we don't think that we can help ourselves, typically. Men are more afraid of grief than women most of the time because it's not culturally acceptable or as acceptable for men to experience and express grief. You're just told to man up. Oh, man up, get over it, move on. And women will tell themselves that, man up, which makes no sense to me. So if we allow grief is a feeling that tends to last a little bit longer. If we allow grief to really rise up like a wave and crest, and it may last 10 to 20 minutes, it's not going to last longer than that. That's 20 minutes is like that's a pretty long time. If we're really crying and feeling the grief, it's not going to last forever. Although people are often afraid if they start to cry and grieve that it'll never end and that they'll just die crying, which has never been the case that I've ever seen or experienced.
And is typically indicative of the fact that the person has not allowed themselves to open that valve and allow grief to flow. And there's this sense that I've now spent so much time suppressing or repressing grief that if I open up this valve at all, that pressure buildup it's an infinite supply of grief, and I'm just going to be feeling it for the rest of my life. But it's not true.
No, it's not true. So we can get stuck in grief because we have resistance to accepting the grief and allowing it to expend itself. But once we accept that we actually can handle the grief, that we are powerful enough, strong enough to handle the grief, to feel it, we move up to the level of pride. So you can see that's a huge jump from grief all the way to pride, which is just underneath courage. So we begin to feel proud of ourselves that we can do it. Okay, so the psychological, here's where it gets interesting. The psychological underpinnings of grief are that it's related to attachment. So we grieve things that we are attached to. We grieve our parents. We grieve a job that we identify as. I'm a firefighter. And when you lose the firefighter job, it's a big loss. So attachment and dependence occur when we feel inside of ourselves, we feel incomplete. We don't feel like we are complete inside. And so we seek objects and people and relationships and places and ideas and concepts to make us feel complete inside, to meet our inner need for completeness. Sometimes completeness is better articulated as emptiness. People feel empty. It's a very common feeling to feel empty. So when we have this, we're building this attachment to a person or a place or a job or whatever, we pour so much of our energy into that person or place or job that we identify that person as mine. This is my kid. This is my boyfriend. This is my husband. This is my job. And when we lose the object or the role or the person, we experience it as a loss of ourself because we have given so much of our energy into that person. So the more energy that we put into something, the greater the fear that we will lose the person, and the greater the loss, the greater the pain associated with undoing those bonds of dependence, the greater the pain in letting go.
So it's a bit analogous to what we talked about earlier, identifying with the feeling, right? Where we get lost and we lose our sense of ourself in a feeling like guilt or shame, and we so tightly identify with the feeling that we think of it as ourself, right? And so similarly, when we have these kind of attachments, we are kind of losing sight of the fact that we are actually our own sort of independent being, not intrinsically linked to this other person or thing. And it just makes it, again, like Jamie has said, it makes it that much harder to extract ourselves, or when that thing is extracted from our life experience, it makes it that much more painful.
So before grief and loss happen, we have almost always the fear of loss. And we typically will handle that fear in two ways. One way is we try to increase the bond. We increase the attachment bond by strengthening it with thinking that if the bond is stronger, then there'll be less likelihood of loss. So we may try even harder at work, or we may, try to attach even more deeply to our partner. We may want, try to take more trips with them, or really what we're doing is we're grasping even more firmly for that person or thing. And so what happens when people are in that fearful place, being afraid that they're going to lose someone or lose something, is that most of the time that other person is feeling very uncomfortable with that. So for instance, if I'm married and I feel my husband's moving away or his attention is somewhere else, and I do a lot of things to kind of get his attention, and I start pulling on his energy, he's going to be like, what's wrong with you? And not want to spend time with me. He's going to experience that energy as feeling very uncomfortable and needy. So the other way that we experience fear and loss in advance is or how we handle it is we will stick our head in the sand. We'll be like an ostrich. So if the writing is on the wall, for instance, that we're probably going to lose our job, there's layoffs, something's going on, or we find ladies' underwear in our houses or whatever, something very obvious is happening, we may totally deny that anything is wrong. There's nothing to see here, people. Nothing to see, nothing going on. So that's just delaying grief. We're delaying grief in some way. So you may have heard of the stages of grief and loss. There are 5 of them. They're synonymous with the stages of death and dying, because grief for most people is like a death, right? Most of the people, when we experience grief, it's some loss of a dream, loss of a person, somebody died, something died. And the first stage of grief and loss is denial. And so initially, being in this stage of denial can be supportive and helpful for us for a period of time, because sometimes the amount of grief that we have over a person dying or a loss of something is so overwhelming that we don't have the faculties or the energy to deal with all of that grief at once. So initially, denial is kind of a coping strategy, but we can't stay in that place. It's not okay, when our kid dies, that we keep a room like with his stuffed animals and everything in that same place, because we're living in denial. It's just not healthy for us to be in that place. The next stage of denial, next stage of grief, once we're done with denial, once we've realized, okay, yes, this did happen, is we become angry. We are angry. So we're kind of we jump up in the map of consciousness.
Yeah, it's an evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when we've spent some time processing our grief, we may find ourselves becoming angry. And again, understanding how these various feelings and levels of consciousness work, we can recognize if that happens, that's actually progress.
Mm-hmm. So people feel angry. They feel angry at themselves. I didn't take care of my mother well enough. My dog died because I didn't take it to the vet in time, whatever it is. Can also be angry at God. It's a very common feeling as well. And then another stage of grief and loss is bargaining, where we try to do things better. Oh, like for instance, if a loved one is dying of cancer, if I try harder, if I do more for this person, they're not going to die. Nothing will happen. Or if I work really, really hard at my job, I won't lose it. So then usually once people move through these stages, then they can actually move into the actual mourning and grief process, the actual depression stage where you're crying and you feel low and you don't want to leave your house and everything is gloomy, which is a very important stage for people to move through. Sometimes people don't ever get there. They don't ever get to the grief process. They don't actually mourn. And then once we've moved through all those stages, we're going to come up to acceptance, which you can see is in the green area on the map of consciousness. It's at 350. Acceptance is different from the resignation. So resignation is, well, this happened and I don't really like it, but I'm just going to deal with it. I'm going to put up with it. I can't really do anything about it. Acceptance is, yes, this happened. It's okay that it happened, and I'm moving forward. And from a really heartfelt place, not an intellectual, oh yeah, I'm moving forward now and nothing is wrong and whatever. It's from a real, you'll feel it when you move into that place of acceptance, you'll feel it in your heart. So when people don't work through these stages, they get stuck in depression, anger, denial, and this energy really affects the endocrine system and the nervous system a great deal. And can create pathological changes in the organs. You want to pipe in?
Nope, no pipe in.
You're good with that?
Yep.
All right, so the next one I'm going to talk about is just above grief, and it's fear. Let me find my page on that. So fear calibrates and vibrates at 100. It's above so many of these other emotions. People, when they're in fear, they may describe themselves as feeling anxious, panicked, terror, paralysis, paranoia. They might minimize it in some way, and I'm just worried, it's just worry. Uneasy, they might feel dread, feel timid or trapped. This is all like synonyms for fear. And so people, when they are responding to fear, are often avoidant, defensive. When someone's defensive with you, you can pretty much guess or bet that they're afraid. Something has triggered fear in them. They do not want to go wherever that conversation is going. They are preoccupied with security. They may be possessive of you, anxious or hypervigilant. They feel that danger is everywhere. And so fear and other feelings, really all feelings, perpetuate themselves. So if you are constantly thinking about all the different things that could go wrong and are going to go wrong and freaking out, being anxious all the time, you will actually attract more of those experiences into your life. So it's very, very important to work with fear in the ways that we have talked about.
And also to recognize again that these feelings are energetic in nature. And so recognizing what the value might be in fear and utilizing the value in that. And maybe you would intuitively say, well, which is, quote, better, fear or apathy? And maybe you'd be tempted to say, well, apathy. I mean, at least with apathy, you don't care. But, fear, like being afraid, who wants to be afraid all the time? But if you think about what happens energetically in a state of fear, like a wild animal, what happens when an animal is afraid? It is pumped full of adrenaline and has the ability to run, flee, fight, whatever it might be. But there's actual energy there.
Mm-hmm.
There's life-preserving energy that is present in fear. And there's way more energy than apathetic, right? If the animal's apathetic, it says, well, predator, whatever. And that doesn't work out very well usually. But if it has a, quote, healthy fear response, then there's actually a channeling of resources within the energy system, and those resources become instantly made available so that the animal or human can take care of itself in a way that will be preserving of life.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is, at times there are situations that are not life-threatening.
Right.
And we're responding in a way that, you know, like a wild animal. And that's when we need to use the tools.
Right.
It makes sense to be afraid sometimes.
Yes, and so just to be clear, the proper response to the presence of that energy that's brought up in a state of fear is not to act like you're a wild animal and be reactive, go on the attack, or run away. It's to recognize what's happening and use that energy. Maybe that energy of fear gets you up off the couch and motivates you to go exercise or meditate or say a prayer or whatever it is. But there's these productive ways of engaging with our feelings that in the presence of fear, there's a lot of energy there that can be transmuted and lifted up into these higher realms.
And the other thing, the last thing I think, unless you have more, to know about fear is that fears are very, very universal. I bet anybody's fear that is present today, if I asked you about a fear, somebody else in this panel would have the same fear. So I hear about people's fears all the time when I work. I'm yet to be surprised. I have not been surprised by anyone's fears because they repeat all the time. Fear of the unknown, fear of dying, fear that you'll lose something. They're just universal. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to anger, because that's everyone's favorite. It's one of the least accepted feelings. So anger is very powerful energy. It arises when we feel that we have been wronged in some way. So other, ways that we talk about anger are rage, resentment, wanting revenge, outrage, indignation, fury, jealousy, vindictiveness, spite, hatred, contempt, wrath. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of synonyms. So in anger, however, there's energy for action. It's it's much higher vibration. There's a lot more energy there. So anger helps us to know when we have to take action to either set a boundary in our lives or to let a person know, oh, hey, you have crossed a boundary of mine. So on the scale of consciousness, you can see anger is resonating at vibrating at 150. It's above shame and guilt and fear. And the energy of anger helps to propel us up and out of the feelings, the lower feelings, into pride and courage. So I often tell people, hey, it's great that you're angry because anger is going to get you someplace. It's going to take you someplace. It's going to take you towards resolution. So we have a ton of suppressed anger in our society, loads of it. There's all this, violence that is happening in real life. There's video games. Most of the video games are violent, and there's tons of violent movies. And just the other day, Noah and I were trying to find a movie, and I was saying to him, are there any movies where people don't get shot and killed? Because I don't want to watch those kinds of movies anymore. I'm not interested in that.
And I keep saying, yes, space movies, but you don't like space movies.
No, I don't. So, I challenge you to go try to find a movie, besides romantic comedies, that nobody dies, nobody gets shot. So, and some people are really attached to their anger and really want to live in that anger. So sometimes we consider anger to be a friend, and we even need to let that go with time. And often people have a lot of guilt about feeling angry. So we try to make the other person wrong so that we can feel justified in our anger rather than just feeling justified by ourselves that we're angry. And so we have a really hard time. People have a really hard time saying, I'm angry without blaming someone else for it. People often think of anger as being very undignified or not spiritual or like a moral failing of some kind. Spiritual wrongdoing, unpleasant. But it can be very useful energy to us because it can help us and inspire us to make changes in our lives that are positive and move in more positive directions. Anger can arise from several sources like if you feel afraid of something, you may actually, instead of experiencing the fear, you may feel the anger. Like you're driving in the car and someone cuts you off, instead of feeling like, oh my God, I'm so afraid that person almost hit me, you may immediately go to anger. Oh, that asshole, I can't believe he cut me off. But that anger is probably protecting the underlying fear that, you know, that could have been bad. That could have been a bad one. Anger can also express or come from pride. So if I think I'm a great person and I've done nothing wrong, but someone else, you know, says, oh, did you hear about Jamie? She said this, this, and this, and that's not whatever. I may feel angry at that other person because my nice girl attachment, my nice girl identity has been challenged. Another one, I'm going to talk a little bit about codependency because I think it's very helpful. Codependent relationships does not mean two people who are dependent on each other. A codependent relationship is a relationship where at least one person is trying to rescue or fix or save the other person. So if, for instance, say I'm married to an alcoholic husband and I really want him to get clean and sober. And so I'm going to enroll him in AA, and I'm going to drag him to recovery, and I'm going to hide all the alcohol and do all these different behaviors to try to convince him to be okay, that he's going to be fixed, and I really want to save him. And he doesn't appreciate my efforts. I'm going to start to feel very angry. I'm going to feel angry at him for not listening, not doing what I say, not fixing himself. And I'm going to feel angry at myself for putting myself through all of this. So anger is really common in relationships in this way. Oh, I've done this thing for you and you don't appreciate it, or you didn't even notice it. However, this is a sign that we have unfair expectations of our partners. So in the example where the person is married to the alcoholic, I may have an expectation that that person's going to get better. That may not be accurate for what's really going on in our lives. That person may not be capable of getting better right now and is not interested in it. Or help me out. Think of another one. Expectations now.
Think of something else.
You're thinking of something else? Would you like to talk about that something else?
In a moment.
Okay. Or I might have an expectation that that Noah pick up all his laundry. I may really want him to do that. However, maybe he's busy and has other stuff he's trying to take care of, and that's not a priority for him. And doesn't matter if it's a priority for me, it's not a priority for him. And that can create a lot of anger and resentment in a relationship. So one of the best things that we can give ourselves is to allow ourselves to express our anger in healthy ways. So some of the ways that we can express our anger is we can go to a quiet space, close the door, and allow ourselves to scream or punch a pillow or get it out in some way. We can journal, we can make noise, we can stomp around. None of these things are harmful to anyone else, especially if we remove ourselves from the situation. It's not probably safe to do this if you have little kids. You don't want to be stomping around the house because it's going to be scary for them, frightening. But if you take time to separate yourself and give yourself the space to express your anger, it's going to be extremely healing for you. Go ahead.
I think it's important to note that a lot of people, one of the reasons anger can seem so prevalent in others and in the world is because there's a particular addictive quality at this level to anger, because it is much higher vibration. There is much more energy here than there is in these lower levels. And so if somebody has a lot of stuff that they're not looking at, that they're not addressing in some way or another, if they have a lot of unresolved fear, apathy, guilt, shame, then the presence of anger can become addictive because it's way higher than those other feelings. And it is in essence an antidote to those feelings because of how much energy is present there. And so it's just important to recognize that there are healthy ways to process our anger, and that it can reflect a net positive in that it is drawing in these resources and providing all of this energy, but we need to then do something with it so that it doesn't become addictive.
Because it's power.
Because it's power. There's way more energy. Well, technically it's not power according to this scale, it's force, but
we think it's power.
But we think of it as power, right? We perceive it to be, I'm in this state of power, and it feels so much better to be angry than it does to be afraid or guilty or shameful, that there's an addictive quality that can come with this level. And so again, the idea is that we just need to remember that this exists, this map of consciousness exists, and have a sense of where we're going, and that this is just another phase in our evolution, and be willing to be with these feelings and let them naturally move into whatever is higher. We don't have to plan it out. We just have to be willing to engage with the anger in a healthy way, and it will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. We're getting close to the time here.
Okay.
Let's talk about constructive conversations.
Great.
So you start. What is a productive conversation?
So one of the questions I think that people have that comes up a lot with feelings, or one of the ways that it shows up, is in interpersonal relationships. And not just how do I manage feelings on my own, but how do I manage and work with feelings specifically within interpersonal relationships. And I think there's a couple of key features here. One is what we already mentioned, is that we need to always remember that we are in charge of our feelings. Our feelings come from within us, not from outside of us. Outside of us, and the events and people and places and things that are happening there can only trigger what is being held within. And so always being in a place of ownership of our feelings is always going to help whatever needs to take place in a conversation. It's going to help that to be a healthy, productive conversation. Because again, if we step outside of that reality and begin projecting or imagining that other people have the power to make us feel a certain way, we're just spinning our wheels, because we're not actually dealing with reality at that point. We're just blaming other people, and it's just not very productive. What else was I going to say about productive conversations? Maybe that was it.
When you're in. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I thought of a couple different examples of I wanted to give you guys some practical advice when you're going to have a difficult conversation. So if you have a difficult conversation that you know you have to have, you're going to tell someone how you feel, and you're anxious about it, or afraid, or even angry about what you have to say, before you have the conversation, you can take a few steps. The first most helpful step is to rehearse as many times as you need to what you want to say in the conversation. And you can do this out loud while you're driving. You can put a stuffed animal in front of you and have a conversation with the stuffed animal. You can talk to your dog, whatever you need to do. So you want to rehearse the conversation as many times as you need to for it to come out easily and fluidly from your mouth. And as you're doing this process, you're going to discover probably some feelings that are arising as this is happening. You can use these tools that we've given you, or we talked about, to work with these feelings, so that when you go to have the conversation in real life, you're going to feel a lot less emotional. You're going to feel more grounded, more centered in yourself, more present, and more able to speak the words that you really want to say. So it's a very excellent thing to rehearse. And you can, again, rehearse out loud. You can rehearse by writing things down, whatever is the easiest thing for you. If you find yourself in a conversation that's getting heated or emotional or upsetting in some way, there's a few things that you can do in that moment to take care of yourself. One easy thing is to just ask for a pause in the relation, or in the conversation, or pause in the relationship. Maybe that's what you need.
We were on a break.
Take a pause and focus on your breath. You can just count your breaths, even just simple breathing in and breathing out. Very easy to do. You can breathe the golden rose-colored light into your body while you're taking your pause. You can and you can go in a different room, and you can dance or move your body in some ways, whatever you need to do. Or I think what's perhaps most important to know is that you can end a conversation anytime you want. I used to think that if somebody was on the phone and we were fighting, that I had to stay on the phone. It wasn't nice to hang up. Who the hell cares? Hang the phone up. You take your power back. Hit, I have to go now, and hang up. That's okay to end a conversation that way. It's okay to take space. It's okay to not ever go back to that conversation if it's not healthy for you to do that. First of all, I wanted to get your questions, if you guys have questions. And then I'd like to do a meditation with you if you're open to it, using an angel called the Heart of Elijah. Some of you have had this technique before, and I'd like to use it today. But first, I want to take any of your questions for me or Noah. Could be any question you want. Could be about relationships, feelings, scenarios that you don't know how to work through.
Specifics or general.
Whatever you want. Does anyone have any questions, or you're all like masters of your feelings? No, I guess you guys are masters.
Cool.
I have a couple.
Yeah.
I have a couple. Okay. How much of these feelings and emotions are a choice? Like, I mean, you could, I guess it is a choice to some extent, but I guess what I'm asking is, how do you get from fear or whatever to where you're vibrating higher?
Weren't we just talking about, I feel like we just had a conversation about this.
Probably.
This is what we do for entertainment, is we sit around and talk about this stuff. I'll start briefly. I do think, as with many things, the answer is both. I do absolutely agree that, especially if we have some practice being that observer of our feelings, we will notice that in a given moment, there is space for a choice to be made. That there is a use for the intellect. You know, feelings are not intellectual, but there is a use for the intellect, and being an observer and sort of it begins to feel like it's happening in slow motion. There's something that's unfolding in slow motion, and you begin to recognize there's this space here as the observer, and I'm watching this happening, and I'm feeling all of this stuff come up, and I can say, I'm either going to get really angry here and lash out, or I'm going to remember what this is about, and that I called this into my experience, and I'm going to move into a place of acceptance, right? There absolutely is space for decisions to be made about how we're going to engage with our feelings, especially, again, using anger as a good example, because it's addictive, right? In the same way that an addict, in fact, I think this is probably the best way to express it. If we rephrase this to be about addiction instead of feelings, well, is addiction about making choice or healing? The answer is both, right? There's absolutely a space there where an addict has the option to make a choice to look in the liquor cabinet or not, or stop at the store and buy a pack of cigarettes or not. There is absolutely a space for choice to be made there. Having said that, if we haven't done a lot of our own healing, or there's big pieces of something going on that haven't been healed and looked at yet, it makes that choice very, very, very difficult, if not impossible. That doesn't mean it's not a choice. It just means that there's more that needs to be done in order for us to be able to take advantage of that space to make the choice. But I do go back to, there was some other question about, or some aspect of that question that made me want to say, if we use these techniques, we don't have to have a lot of strategy. The being in the feeling and allowing it to just communicate to us whatever it is there that needs to be communicated, opening the valve, letting the feeling run its course, will naturally help that feeling and help us evolve up into a higher state of being.
Okay.
We don't have to necessarily choose, well, I'm angry and I'm going to do this work, and out of anger I'm going to pick this and try to be that. We don't really have to do that, because the feeling is the energy and is the motion and activity, and they naturally want to evolve. That's the natural thing for them to do. And when they come up to be felt and we give them space and we allow them to accelerate, it feels uncomfortable because I have all of this fear that's accelerating within me, but the acceleration in the speeding up of fear takes fear out of the realm where now it's vibrating so fast that it's not fear anymore.
Mhm.
Now it's actually pride. And so there's a natural component to this evolution where we don't have to really overthink it. If we learn to give the feelings space and be with them, they will just organically evolve into whatever is next for them.
Okay.
I want to say a little bit on that too. So I think there's a lot out there about choosing to be happy or choosing to feel safe or choosing. I don't think for most people they can make those choices for the reasons that Noah explained. And I think it's very disempowering and unhelpful for, the memes that say, choose to be happy, yeah, that's nice, except that people have had a lot of trauma and it hasn't been cleared from their systems and they haven't dealt with the feelings below happiness.
This is the conversation we were having.
Right.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think, yes, at some levels of consciousness, we can choose to feel happy. We can choose to feel whatever we want to. However, until we have worked through these lower levels of feelings, we're not going to really be able to make those choices. It's not going to be,
it's
not
realistic.
fair. It's not realistic, and it's not fair to expect ourselves to just choose to be happy. It's like, it's a form of bypassing. It's a spiritual bypass.
And I do agree, and I think it's really important for people, especially in the social media days, you see some meme that comes across social media that says, you can just choose to make it a great day and choose to accept God's love, and, having a happy life is a choice. Well, to somebody who's clinically depressed, that's not really true. And I don't think it does us any good, as Jamie's saying, to buy into the idea that it's just a matter of choice. It's not just a matter of choice. There is space, these little spaces where we can begin to make choices, but trying to just choose our way out of a lifetime of shame or depression is not particularly fair or realistic.
Right. Thank you. What else?
I have more. So you talked about how fear can be used in a positive way because it causes us to take action. But do you feel like some of the other emotions are useful to an extent, minus maybe shame, because I feel like shame kind of can get us stuck. But do you, like guilt, for instance? I mean, are there some things that we should feel guilty for so then we can address that and then move past it?
Yeah. I think, yes, there are times that we need to feel guilty because we've done something wrong. We feel the guilt, we move into forgiveness, and we make the reparations. We have to correct the situation. Maybe that's I'm sorry, maybe that's I'm changing my behavior, maybe that's something else. But yes, I think really all of these feelings have their place, but we don't want to stay.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to stay there.
And I'm a big language nitpicker. I would say it's not so much that there are times where we should feel guilty as much as it is that there are moments when guilt might be a very natural and appropriate feeling to feel. And again, remember, feelings are information. And so in a given moment, if all of a sudden I feel guilty, I can stop and go, okay, what is this about? And is there something that I have done wrong, or that wasn't appropriate or wasn't healthy or infringed upon the rights and freedoms of another? And so the guilt is that blast of information. It's like, hey, you might want to take a look at this. This isn't really appropriate human behavior in a civilized society. And so we can use the guilt constructively in that way.
Okay.
But in general, you say, are there uses for these other lower feelings? They have the use, potentially, hypothetically, to elevate whatever is below them. So shame has the only value shame has is that you're not dead. The only thing lower than shame on the scale is death, right? And so, practically speaking, there's no value in shame. There's none.
Okay.
What value in guilt could there be? Well, guilt has the ability to, again, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I know you're feeling shame, but, your dog has been, running around this guy's house and destroying it for 3 months, and it's cost him $10,000 to fix up his yard. Well, in that case, that feeling of guilt is going to help me go address what needs to be addressed so that I don't have shame.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for, it's over only one other feeling. Is grief productive and useful? Yes, in that it can help elevate us out of shame, guilt, and apathy, right?
And also, grief is a way that we break down our dependencies on other people, on things outside of ourselves.
But so does that make sense? If you look at any particular feeling on that scale, it is quote good for accelerating anything below it and helping to lift you out of those lower states.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. But more importantly, I think the key word in your question was should. And that's always a big red flag for me. Should I feel guilty? I don't know, because that's an intellectualization, right? Either you feel guilty or you don't. And if you feel guilty, you can look at what that's about. And I'm going to be with the guilt and see what information I get. Oh, I feel guilty because there's this, I actually have to apologize to this person for being a world-class jerk. Or I feel guilty and I have no idea why, but I know my mom always used to make me do these things and say these things to me so maybe it's just this autopilot programming. But in either case, it's not a should. It's either we feel a feeling or we don't. And if we feel that feeling, it's providing information, and we can be with it and use these techniques and see what it evolves into. Mm-hmm. The only caveat to that would be a sociopath, right? If there's a mental illness and somebody is a sociopath and they don't feel any shame or grief or any of these feelings, and they quote should, in the sense that you should probably feeling some, if you have seriously harmed another individual and you feel absolutely nothing about that, that's a clinical mental illness. That's called being a sociopath. Mm-hmm. So aside from sociopaths, I'm not a big fan of should.
So that kind of brings me to my last question. Would you recommend kind of doing that body scan technique? Sometimes I feel like I just have a jumble of emotions and I can't fully pick one out or identify what they are.
Mm-hmm. You can use the body scan. When I feel a whole bunch of stuff, try throwing on some music and allowing your body to move with whatever is there. Could be a lot of stuff. And so what that does is it starts to kind of break down all the confusion, and you may actually find yourself crying spontaneously or yelling or whatever. You can also breathe the golden rose colored light into the jumble and see what teases out. You don't have to name these feelings. You
Right.
never have to name them. You don't have to know what they are. You'll just probably be aware of what they are for the most part, especially as you continue to work. Like maybe it's a big jumble, it's a big mess at first, and then after a few minutes of sending loving kindness to the energy or embracing it and breathing the soft golden rose colored light into it, you may find that one word kind of sticks out in your mind, and it might be grief or it might be anger, and then that's just for you to be aware of. Still don't need to do anything with that. Yeah, it's very common for situations to be complex where there's a lot of feelings related to them. So, yeah.
And again, the labeling of them is a fun human convention that we like to do with our brains, right? The bottom line is that the feelings are energy, and it's either energy that's here or here or here or here or here, but it's all energy. And so if there's a jumble, then label it, this is my jumble feeling. That's fine.
Yeah.
Turn on the faucet, feel the jumble feeling, breathe light into it, allow it to elevate and transmute, and maybe, again, as Jamie's saying, maybe as some of those feelings are sort of elevated and transmuted, now you're just left with fear. And then that can provide some clarity for you.
Mm-hmm.
Good questions.
Yeah, very good. Anyone else have a question? If not,
I'm going to do a meditation.
I would like to do a meditation. Does anyone need to end the call? Just raise your hand. Noah has to end the call. He's going away. Raise your hand if you have to end the call, or you're good. All right, you're good for a little bit. Okay. It will only take maybe 10 minutes. So I'm going to move into the comfortable chair now because I'm sitting on like a weightlifting box. Goodbye, bad chair. Okay. So for this meditation, I'm going to use a being known as the Heart of Elijah. And the Heart of Elijah is kind of like an angel. So you can think of him as an angel. He's lovely, lovely energy, very peaceful energy. So you can sit for this. You don't have to lay down, but if you'd like to lay down, feel free. But either way. But I would ask that you close your eyes, because it works better if you close your eyes. And I'll wait for everyone to be ready. Okay. So just taking a nice deep breath now. Just letting all the tension completely dissolve from your body. Just allowing your body to sink even deeper into the surface of whatever you're on. Just sinking deeper and deeper. Enjoying it more and more. And the deeper you sink, the better you feel. And beginning to breathe in a beautiful, soft, golden rose colored light into your body. Just breathing this soft light into every cell of your body. Allowing it to flow freely throughout the body. Bathing and soothing every cell. And just bathing away all the tension that it comes to. As you sink even deeper inside. Allowing all the muscles in your scalp and in your face to soften and relax. And sending a wave of relaxation down through all the muscles of the neck and the throat. And sending this relaxation down through all the muscles of the shoulders and the arms and the hands. Down through the whole body. And all the internal organs softening and letting go. And we ask for the presence of the heart of Elijah. And for us all to be enfolded in a pillar of light and flame. And we open now into a state of deep acceptance. And allowing that love and flame of the heart of Elijah to wash through our whole body and energy system. Dissolving all of the thinking and all of the effects of the thinking. Dissolving it all completely. And transmuting all of this energy into love. And allowing that love and flame of the heart of Elijah to wash through all shame. Just washing through all of these feelings, dissolving them completely. Transmuting all of this energy into love. And allowing that love and flame of the heart of Elijah to wash through all feelings of guilt and blame of yourself. Just washing through all of these feelings, dissolving them completely. Transmuting all of this energy into love. And allowing that love and flame of the heart of Elijah to wash through all the patterns of thinking and feeling and reacting this way. Dissolving them all completely. And transmuting all of this energy into love. And allowing that love and flame of the heart of Elijah to wash through you, bringing all of your energy into harmony and strengthening your sense of yourself and strengthening your sense of your own goodness. And filling you with light. And we thank you now, heart of Elijah, the pillar, and all of the divine presence that was here helping. And we ask that your presence remain with all of us as this healing continues to integrate and unfold, and helping us to wholeheartedly love and accept ourselves, no matter what. And when you're ready, you can just open your eyes. So I'd love to hear any of your questions, or if you have comments or anything you'd like to share now. No, you guys are all good, huh? Good. Hi, Julian. Thank you guys so much for your patience with our technical difficulties, first of all, and for being a part of this class. And I hope you got some tools that you can use in your own life. And I will happily send you all some notes on this stuff. So if you feel like there are holes in your notes, I can just send them to you. In a few days, I'll get it done. I'm going to upload this recording so you can listen to it again if you want to. You can access the meditation. And I hope it was fun for you guys to hear Noah and I have different perspectives and ways that we work with things, and that's healthy and good. And so he's not dancing around the kitchen like expressing his rage. Like that's just not what he does.
I really enjoyed, both of the different perspectives. It was really great.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have different ways of expressing our feelings, and I think they're both correct. They're both correct, and they work for us. So I hope that with all the different options that we've given you, there's something in there that resonates for you that you can use in your life. I think for kids, if you have kids, the music and dancing the feelings option usually works really well. Works really well with kids. Golden rose colored light works really well for my 10-year-old and not well with my 6-year-old or 7-year-old. So it's somewhat age dependent. Yeah. Any other questions? Julian, do you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. Well, you unmuted yourself, so I thought maybe.
Oh, yeah. No.
Anything else from anyone? Thank you so much for staying late also so that we could do the meditation. I really wanted to do that. If any of you who don't already have the information on how to do your own Heart of Elijah work, please feel free to email me or get in touch with me somehow. I will happily give you a script for the Heart of Elijah, how to do your own healing with this, if you liked it. And also I have a recording of my voice doing an induction, doing that kind of calming piece. And then you can use that as a jumping off point to do your own work. So I would be happy to send that to any of you that want it. Do you want that, Julian?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shelley, you want it? Okay. Everyone else may probably have it already, but yeah.
I'm not sure if I have the voice one.
Oh, you want my
Amy.
voice, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send you my voice.
Always.
Shelley, you're muted. Can't hear you. I unmuted you. You're good.
I think my main reason for doing and wanting to see what this is about, I have some clients that are so blocked up in energy centers, and I wanted a way to be able to help them so that they could open up to more healing. They're just stuck.
Yep.
And I know that when we did the cranial class, Jordan's cranial class, there was a big connection there. When we were working together, and I know there's great power in that. So I wanted to see if there was something I could do and from this to help them.
Yeah, when people are stuck, and I know they're stuck, I will talk about these different techniques. I will offer them to them.
Yeah.
I offer these tools every day. I teach them the different ways, and I say, listen, pick one of these and try it.
Yeah.
And I tell people regularly to journal. Even if they feel stupid journaling, just do it. Just see what comes up. You may be surprised, especially if you approach it from like an automatic writing kind of way. Just write whatever comes to mind, and if it's talking about tuna fish sandwiches, like who cares? But at least you're starting to get that energy to move. I hope, did you find something that you think you can talk about with your clients?
Definitely.
Okay.
There's some great things. I had the gal who was in here right before we started. She has 6 children, and she's kind of stuck in they're very successful. They are very successful adults, but she misses them horribly, and she would really love to just have them be little again. Even though these people are, she raised 6 amazing children. They're all grand, but she has some real issues that are keeping her body from accomplishing movement. So she's been stuck, not being able to move properly for 7 years.
Bless you, Julie.
Bless you.
Yeah. It sounds like she's stuck somewhere in the grief process and needs, maybe if you talk to her about the grief process and allow her to identify maybe what stage she feels she's in, that
Yeah.
she understand that there's feelings that have to be they have to be felt. They have to be, we can't magic our feelings away. And unfortunately, we can't choose which ones we're having and not having.
Well,
Of course, we'd all like to choose happiness if we could.
Yeah.
So, right.
Well,
Julie,
thank you so much.
you're very, very welcome. I'm glad you were here. Thank you. Julie, did you have something?
is this going to be the only workshop that you have on feeling?
Oh, no. I'm sure we'll do more. Yeah, I was just telling Noah, we always laugh. We think maybe we should just put a video camera in our house because we have these really in-depth conversations all the time. So we may plan to just do some periodic like Facebook Lives that will be free and some other planned online workshops. Yeah, we have a lot that we would like to talk about and share because we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, and we've been on quite a journey. And I know I can see it in other people's lives that they're on the same journey. And it'd be nice if someone gave you a map.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't we all like a map of like, where do we go? Like, what's happening?
Right.
And I think we're lacking maps in our world. So we'd like to give you guys some maps. Yeah.
Jane, real quick, how do we send payment to you?
I sent you all, hopefully you got it, a QuickBooks invoice. So would it come to your email?
Okay.
If you don't get it, shoot me a message. I'll resend it or send it to a different email or whatever I need to do. Sometimes it gets put into spam.
Okay, and we can just PayPal you?
It's going to be through your credit card or bank withholding. It
Okay.
doesn't. I don't store the credit card information though. You just enter it, and if you need to do PayPal, just let me know, and I'll send you a different thing.
Gotcha. Thank
I'm
you.
gonna go. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Anybody else? No. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Jamie. It was great.
See you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.